I'd just like to set you up for a next discussion at tables. I've been collecting concepts over the last couple of years, so these are just a few. I've got a much bigger collection that I could share with people, but this illustrates the point. There are concepts that are deeply embedded in the culture, the language and culture itself, and I've been trying to yield them to try and see how is it that these concepts play out in the kind of mindset, because if we're doing what Joe said in terms of trying to enter into somebody else's shoes or somebody else's way of seeing the world, knowing the world, then we need some hooks to do that. Now, I'm conscious that these don't fall into the category of stereotypes, or that we don't say, you know, all Indonesians think this way or all Germans do such and such. These are just a sense of ways that these distinctive languages and cultures might frame the world, or some of the hooks that they hang meaning on in interpreting the world. So these are some examples. What I try and ask my students to consider is, what else is there? What else have you encountered, particularly if you've learnt that language as a second language learner, but even as first language learners of these languages, what is it that you try and teach students that is distinctive about the mindset, about the ideas, the way these languages frame the world, so that you can actually start to get students entering into that way of seeing as well. So we have our regular bunch of concepts, space, time. If we go back to that original slide, there's a whole bunch of general concepts that we could draw on, you know, the entire rest of the curriculum for concepts. But in languages, we also want these distinctive concepts that rest within our particular languages and cultures.
For example, in Italian, I would say la bella figura, and operating in a way that we do bella figura. In other words, I'm almost at a loss of words to say how to say that in English, but that you kind of have to present yourself in an appropriate way. It's not by chance that you go to a city like Milan and you see everybody so eminently well dressed, the afternoon walk and all of that entails, because it is all part of this bella figura. And so...
what does bella figura mean literally, even if you can't translate the full meaning?
Bella is beautiful, figura is figure or shape, but it means, it has a meaning about how you are going to be taken together. It has a meaning of making a good impression, you know, in other words, that the other is going to have a good sense about you. You have to look the part. You have to look the best. That's right.
Sense, yeah.
That's right. You have to do, you know, you have to, if it's giving a gift, you want to give a gift and do bella figura. In other words, it's not going to be a mean or, you know, shabby kind of gift. It's one that is presents you in the best light. That's right. It's always this sense of presenting in the best light. Can you see how that concept from the Italian way, I could do a whole module on la bella figura, is absolutely crucial to the Italian way. And can you see how many phrases I've had to find just to try and render what that concept is?
There are some things that it's just completely inappropriate to ask people in some places, like, how much is your salary? You laugh because you would find that rude. But actually, in some societies, they ask you that. It's about the second thing people ask you sometimes. Or what blood group are you? In some societies, if they ask you what blood group you are, they've probably got designs on you. They're thinking of compatibility. This one has got them going, hasn't it? And political opinion. In some societies, it's extremely inappropriate for young people to have opinions. certainly political opinions. In other societies, and this is true, I know a group of French people in which you sit at their dining table in Paris and the kids are telling everyone who the parents should be voting for. And this is regarded as the autonomous individual expressing him or herself and becoming a full citizen. In other societies, it was really, really inappropriate. What could they possibly know? This varies individually, of course, and I'm not wanting to stereotype, of course, but there are paradigms within cultures that are valued, and it doesn't mean that everyone adheres to them. Overstatement and understatement. I mean, I could tell you lots of stories. I married into an English family, and overstatement is something they never do and always accuse the people that I belong to of doing all the time. And they do understatement, which is irritating. They're looking at a glorious view and they say, oh, that's rather pretty. So it's perfectly fine to understate. It's regarded as dignified if you're an understating person. But it's regarded as really, really not quite there if you're an overstating person. Now, I'm just going to end with a story about how this is deeply significant in a social sense too. A few years ago, I was watching late night television. I don't want you to get any bad ideas about this. I never watch television. But I was watching television and there was a program about the Sendero Luminoso in Peru. The Sendero Luminoso were the Shining Path Maoist guerrillas who terrorized Lima and other parts of Peru for a long time. And they interviewed this man who was a Shining Path guerrilla, and he had his bandana on. And he was talking in Spanish about la pobreza, the poor, and the role of the poor in bringing about this revolution. And I was thinking, he's talking about the poor, but in a very, very special way. For him, the poor meant the potential for revolution. Then they switch to a priest who worked in this particular slum. And he was talking about la pobreza, about poverty and about the poor, about God's love for these people and how this life had given them nothing, but in the future life they would be rewarded. So for him, exactly the same people in the world, the people who were materially deprived, were actually a completely different ideological category. And then they switched to a World Bank economist. And this person is talking about poverty and Peru's failure at that time to guarantee social mobility. And for him, poverty was the failure of the rich to get richer. Because if the rich get richer, some crumbs fall off the table and the poor get some crumbs. That was his worldview, right? What were they talking about? They were talking about the same word, but radically different concepts. They couldn't have been more different. Really different political ideologies, different concepts, exactly the same word. I think, to me, that sums up both the intercultural and, in this case, the intra-cultural diversity of meaning. It's all carried by language. It's all carried by the connotations and the sense that we give language. And so we're involved in, through our language work, managing the meanings that our society makes for us. It's so important. Good luck.